Hey everyone, I'm Garrett Hill. I wanted to run through kind of some of the broad strokes of judging and the criteria. I know more than anyone that this is kind of a dynamic and somewhat confusing topic, especially as we move through the competition when things change. So it is my goal here to give you as much clarity that I can, so that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of the judging process and will provide just a better experience for everyone, whether you're a skater or a coach or just someone here that's watching in the crowd, that's here to support your athlete. I got asked today earlier in an interview that we did for World Skate, do you ever get nervous that sometimes the skaters hate you for giving a score that actually ranked them really well, but they didn't understand that the score was actually a good ranking? And the overwhelming answer to that is yes. It's a huge problem. There's a lot of the times that we give a good ranking score, and even though visually it looks low because that's just where we're at in the sliding scale at the time, um, and we're like celebrating at the score that we gave you, and then it just doesn't translate. So I want to try and avoid that as much as possible because I know there's a lot riding on the line for this event, and you need as much context as possible to succeed. So that being said, we could start by just introducing this judging panel here. Every judge on this panel fulfills every requirement from the International Olympic Committee. That includes their experience in not only skateboarding, but their experience as a professional judge. All of these judges have lots of experience at world skateboarding events, world championship events, and they've judged many different contests, not just world skate, but many others. We fulfill a country and a gender quota. We also, all of these judges have passed the results from JET, which is short for Judging Evaluation Tool, which is a world skate software program that not only gives us incredibly detailed analytics on the judges, but we judge the judges. So that's everyone's held accountable up here. We have for you Corey Duffel from the USA, Danny LeBron from Spain, Amy Massey from Australia, JB Gillette from France, and of course, Vanessa Torres from USA. And you know me, I'm Garrett Hill. I'm your head judge. So, as I said before, context and clarity, those are the two main things that we're going to be focusing on here. So we can dig into probably the biggest concept here, and that's the judging criteria. So these are going to be what you're seeing here. These are going to be our five main pillars here for our judging criteria. These are the five different categories that we live as judges within the most. We see all different kinds of runs, and they all fulfill one of these different criteria. That being the trick difficulty, the variety of the tricks that you have in your run, or single tricks, the quality of the execution. This speaks to how well you landed the trick from start to finish. Your use of the course. How well did you use this entire course? Did you hit all the obstacles on this course? How unique was your line? That's what that speaks to. Flow and consistency is about how creative were you? Did you hit a two-piece obstacle that not anybody else was able to hit? How consistent were you pertains to, were you able to get through your full run without any bails or landing anything sketchy? And of course, we have repetition, and we're going to dig into a lot of these different subcategories later on, but repetition is obviously a big part of the judging criteria. Now, all of these judging criteria are what we rely on in order to get to the overall impression. The overall impression is the sum of all of the parts of your run. This is what we are left with when your run ends, looking at how many categories of the judging criteria you fulfilled. The fact of the matter is, simply put, the more criteria you fulfill, the better your ranking will be. Think of the parts of your run as sort of a negotiation, because that's what happens. The judges negotiate when your run is done. The more criteria that you fulfilled, it's easier to negotiate your score higher, which is always good for the athletes. What's important to remember is that the scores that we distribute are always based on data. We are always referencing back to numbers and categories and criteria. Seldomly do we ever give an emotionally driven score. So all of the scores that we distribute and all of the scores that go out, they have a specific rhyme and reason to them. digging into some of the criteria a little bit more, specifically pertaining to runs, I want to talk about quality versus quantity. This is a really important concept here for you to grasp. At all of the writers' meetings, I do discuss the concept of quality over quantity. Now, this describes a scenario where a run that has less tricks in it can score higher than a run that has more tricks in it. This is true and only true if the trick difficulty outweighs the run with more tricks. This is a big part of the overall impression. So quality here, this is on the left side of the screen. This represents a run that has really technically difficult tricks, right? There's 5 bars here. These are just like 5 bangers right after another. And then we have the second run here that represents more tricks in the line, but these are more basic tricks. These aren't like substantially highlight tricks. The judges are going to weigh into the judging criteria of trick difficulty here and probably favor the quality line over the quantity line. Now, the most important concept here is this winning run, right? This is what we want. This is what we want to see. We want to see a healthy mix of quality and quantity. We want to see trick difficulty. We want to see variety. This is coming back to our judging criteria, how well you use the course, your flow and consistency. We want a little bit of everything here in order to give you a better score. Now, something to take note of is that sometimes we don't get this winning run. We don't get runs that have a perfect blend of everything. And in those scenarios, a lot of the times what's next in line is those quality runs. That's that kind of run that we're seeing on the left side, where those runs that are technically difficult heavy, those outweigh the other runs, and those are the ones that are in front. So understand that the one on the right, winning run, that's what we want to see. But if we don't see that perfectly and it's not completely obvious, then that technically difficult run that's really heavy hitting is probably going to outweigh and be in the lead. So we can move to the quality of execution. This pertains to how well you did your trick, right? Your style, your speed, your distance, your height, the quality of the landing. All of these things are coming into play when we talk about quality of execution, which is going to move the needle substantially on your score. So this slide, it does explain the differences between tricks that are locked in versus tricks that are not locked in. And that's kind of the main point here that I want to make, is that the tricks that are not locked into are scored drastically less, mainly due to the judging criteria, quality of execution, which is what we're looking at here. Listen, in the 10 plus years that I've been a judge, I have never heard of a scenario where an athlete was awarded a higher score for not properly locking into the trick that they were trying to lock into. It hasn't happened before, and it's not going to happen here in Dubai. If you don't lock into your trick, your score is going to be scored down substantially as opposed to you locking into your trick. So that means if you don't lock into the tricks in your run, you are missing out on a lot of points that you could have gotten if you did lock into your tricks. And especially in the single trick section. If you don't lock into a trick in the single trick section, that's going to really move the needle on your score. We'll talk more about single trick strategy if that happens in that section. So deep breath, everybody. We're going to talk about the judging scale. All right, hang on. This is arguably the most difficult concept to explain, and I completely empathize with you when we talk about this. The judging scale is a difficult concept, not only for the skaters but for the coaches and for our viewers at home. What this icon represents here is a visual representation of our main point, and that is, as the number of athletes decreases throughout the competition, the judging scale will increase. Now, why would we do that? We have over 100 athletes on the board for open qualifier. And when you have that many athletes on the board, you really need to utilize the entire scale. We are always scoring to rank in this situation. So that's just why we have to do this. So a run, really what this means is that a run that scores a 65 in qualifying, that could easily boost up to an 85 when we get to finals. And that is because we have the liberty to do that. We have the space on the scoring board to do that. We're not going to get jammed up in the numbers. And that really is the main reason why we do that. So later on the coming slides, I'll explain what happens when we don't do that and how to troubleshoot this, how to follow along and understand the context of the scores that we're putting out on days like Open Qualifier for tomorrow. One of the main points that I want to make perfectly clear is that it doesn't matter what heat you are in. Just because you were in an earlier heat does not mean that you are automatically going to receive a low score, so much so that you are not able to make it to the next round of qualification. This graph represents highlight runs that are in heat 1, heat 2, heat 4, heat 5. We do see these highlight runs throughout the competition, and I want to make it perfectly clear that the judges are always referencing back to heat 1, heat 2, heat 3, our earlier heats. You will not be forgotten if you're in one of those earlier heats. We are always going to be referencing back to those memorable benchmark runs so that you don't get left behind and your score can hold up by the time we get to the end of the day. Now, I'm going to use Russell Cordano here as a good example to explain this. Last year, he skated, what was it, Rome? That was the first competition that he skated. He skated second. He dropped in second out of probably 200 riders, and that score carried him through to the finals. So it has happened before. It can happen again. So keep that in mind. So moving forward, explaining more about the scale and why we have to do what we do regarding the sliding scale are creating windows. We have to create these windows in the scorebook to allow for a high volume of skaters, growth in trick difficulty, and elimination of tied scores. We don't want any tied scores. We want to avoid that. But see where this hand is slotting in scores here. Imagine for a minute that between this 50 and what looks like the 70 zone, see how all of these athlete scores are spaced out evenly here? Imagine that there's, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 different runs within this small category here. When that happens, we only have about 6 seconds to enter scores in. 10 seconds feels like an eternity for television, and for every 1 second that we spend in the judging booth, it feels like 10 for everybody else. So we really need to create room in the scale in order to reference back to a like-minded run and have a couple seconds to deliberate so that we can accurately place your run. That's why we do this. If we don't do this, if we don't spread out the scale, it's easier to make ranking errors. So that's why we do this. It's a necessary evil. I get it. It's harder to follow along with, but this is exactly why we do that. More importantly, how to troubleshoot the context and how to understand the context is you have to look at your ranking. You have to look at the runs that are near you. Which run was above you? Which run was ranked below you? Look at those runs. That will give you the context that you need to understand what the judges thought about your run. So please don't rely on that score for Open Qualifier. Just focus on that ranking. That will give you a way better picture of what we thought about the run. And finally, this is really important. When we get to semifinals, this scoring to rank style that I just described, that sliding scale, that stops. That completely goes away, and the skaters are going to see the most traditional scores for their runs. That means you are going to get the full, uncut representation of what we thought about your run in semifinals. Why? Because every single 1/10 of a point matters at that point, more than ever, because we move into the single trick section. So if we're scoring to rank and there's somebody that got moved seven points ahead of you, that now puts you in a 7-point deficit. So we are completely aware of that. We're going to be more cognizant of giving you as much of an accurate representation, even leading up to that. I would love to be able to give you a more accurate representation in quarterfinal so that you can switch gears or strategize or make any necessary changes that you need to try and increase your ranking. But know that once we get to semifinals, if you're in heat one, you have just as much chance at making it through to finals as the riders in heat two, because we are not doing that sliding scale technique scoring to rank anymore. Here we go. Repetition rule. This is a big one. Let's talk about it in runs. So simply put, if you want the maximum amount possible for your run score, don't repeat tricks. If you repeat tricks, we have to deduct from your overall score. All runs that include repetition are not receiving the maximum score that they could have received if their run had more variety. Can you still get a good score if you repeat tricks? Yeah, sure. That's a strategy. But is it the best score that you could have received? No. So if you have the ability to create variety and create diversity in your run, that's going to serve you much better than relying on the same kind of trick. And what I mean by the same kind of trick is if you're only doing kickflip variation tricks, are you only doing heel flip variation tricks, are you only doing caballero variation tricks? Yes, it can still get you a good score, but normally how we would do that, how we would slot a run like that, is we would look at a like-minded run of trick difficulty, and you would have to be ranked below that run because of your repetition, how much you were using the repetition. Now, it's a little bit different when we go to single tricks. We have a different strategy when it comes to single tricks. We do use the same criteria for run scoring, but there's more of an emphasis on the technical difficulty of the trick, the quality of the execution, the way you landed it, and obviously the repetition. And specifically if you had done the trick in your run or not. How it differs from scoring runs as well is that there is a preset number allocated to each trick beforehand. It's a best case scenario score, and that's agreed upon by the judging panel in advance by means of a trick ledger, which is basically an encyclopedia of tricks. There's a couple hundred tricks in there that we rely on and we refer to, and that's going to be something that we're always looking back on to make sure that there is consistencies in what we are scoring people. We don't reference scores from past events, and the reason why we do that is because the course changes. If it was like a basketball court and each one of these courses were the same, sure, we could repeat scores and publish those, and it would be a different story. But because everything changes from event to event, we make the necessary changes. That being said, we still try to stay consistent with our trick hierarchy. All of a sudden, a front board isn't going to get scored higher than a kickflip front board. So you'll see consistency there, but minor tweaks to the overall scoring. So what I've done is we've got these two videos that we're going to show you. The first example, both of them pertain to the repetition rule. The first video example pertains to a minor scenario of how the repetition rule can affect your score. And the second video we'll play will be a little bit more substantial example of how the repetition rule can affect your score. So I'm going to talk you through this video as we play it now.
Yeah.
So we're going to have 3 different skaters doing the same exact trick in this video. It's going to be the kickflip front board for all 3 skaters. So as you'll notice, all 3 of these skaters landed this kickflip front board perfectly. But you'll see a minor difference in Aisa's score. She got an 86, and Yumika and Miyu, or she got an 84, and Yumika and Miyu got 86. Why would that happen? We cut to the middle of Aisa's run from the same event round, and you see the kickflip front board there. So this describes a scenario where if you do the same trick on a different spot, that's going to reflect in your overall score, even if you landed it perfectly. The other riders did not do a kickflip front board in their run. That's why they were awarded the full point total for that run. So we're going to move now to, and as you can see, that was a minor scenario. We're going to move to a little bit more substantial scenario right now for the second video. And we're going to follow along with the same format and show 3 different riders doing the same trick, executing them pretty much perfectly. So this was from Lausanne, obviously. We have 3 front feebles, Bruce getting an 81, Paige getting an 81, but all of a sudden you see Yomika here, she got a 77. And why would that happen? Even though they all landed it perfectly, this cuts to her run, and it's the same trick on the same obstacle. Now, this is a lot more of a substantial scenario. Doing the same trick on the same obstacle from your run carried over to the single trick section is going to have a more drastic and more substantial effect on your overall score. So please keep that in mind. Before we, yeah, oh, this is a new change here. This is important to keep in mind, especially for the coaches, because you'll, for the coaches that are writing the runs down and are clocking this, the judges will only be looking at the counted run. This is a new rule change, and it makes it more fair to the skaters, I think. I was pushing for this to get made because previously in past events, we would look at your entire run performance, even the run that was the throwaway run, including the score that didn't carry over. From this point on, we are only going to be looking at your counted run, which is the run score that was higher, to see if you are eligible for the highest amount that you can get in the trick section pertaining to the repetition rule deductions. So keep that in mind. Counted run only. So that wraps up the repetition rule. And before we get into event related situations, I'm going to just throw out some general call outs from the judges because we did this last time at the last technical meeting and it seemed to help the coaches. And this is basically our view, of course. These are our suggestions and the way that we perceive the course. Some broad strokes here. So the big section, as you could probably tell, it's not the biggest big section that we've had. It's kind of on the smaller side, so you can expect that maybe some of those scores that were getting 90s at the other events, they may not score 90s at this event. Why? Because that big section is just a little bit smaller. That being said, there's still opportunities here to skate big obstacles. That bump to wedge in the center of the park is pretty cool. And obviously the flyouts on either sides, the pyramid, the gap to rails, one of those I think is 8 feet and the other one maybe 10 feet. Those are huge. Any fly out to tricks down that obstacle are going to get you some really good scores. JB Gillette, one of our French judge, he would call that a jackpot score. So we encourage you to be creative. We always like to encourage the skaters to you can do technically difficult tricks on smaller obstacles and still keep yourself in the mix. This isn't just a big section competition. So please be creative. That being said, we love rewarding flip tricks down the stairs because there's a gigantic risk there. I'll just throw this out there. We've never seen a quarter pipe single trick in the single trick section, so that'd be cool to see. Yeah, and then I think this last bit, this kind of pertains more to the women's division because we see this a little bit more. Doing flip tricks where you just kind of roll up the ramp and it's kind of a deck check, that kind of dampens the overall impression of your run. We know that you know by now that doing a flip trick or doing multiple flip tricks in your run is important and it helps move the needle on the overall impression, but you'll get a substantially higher overall impression if you or your rider can just clear the pyramid. Some of these pyramids aren't that big, so it would really benefit the skaters to try and just clear that obstacle. Or if you're doing a flip trick up a Euro gap, just don't go straight out of the bank and do it to flat. That'll help with the overall impression. Lastly, we can go over some event related situations. Here we go.
Just an information for everyone. We're starting to get questions in the Q&A section for the sake of just being able to address everything and not making too much confusion. So instead of raising hands, if you can fill in your question in the Q&A, that will help us big time.
Cool. While they're coming up with their questions, let's go through some of the event related situations. We could start with the start and end of the run. This is important. The start of your run. The clock is triggered by the timekeeper when the athlete places both feet on the board. When you're in motion and both feet are on the board, that's when your time starts. That's the beginning of the 45-second run. Now, the end of it, a trick will be considered within time when the maneuver has been in progress before the signal horn sounds. You have a 45-second run. When you hear that buzzer, that is the end of the 45-second run. Your last trick should be already popped or in motion by the time that buzzer, you hear the start of that buzzer. If you pop after the beginning of that buzzer, that goes beyond 45 seconds. So that trick is not going to be in time. That being said, we're going to try and keep that buzzer short so that it's not confusing to you. If the buzzer's too long, sometimes you think that you have enough time before the buzzer ends to get a trick in, and that's not the case. So please keep that in mind. Now, when external interference, let's talk about that. The timekeeper in the World Skate Rules says the timekeeper will not stop the clock under any circumstances other than the athlete's withdrawal. That means if you want to stop your run at your own choice. If the performance has to be interrupted for external reasons, the athlete will be granted a restart or rerun option. This basically means if you are, hit in the head by a bird or just some external interference happens that really genuinely gets in the way of you doing the run, that's fine. We'll work with you on it. But understand that the protocol is you need to find the course manager right away. You need to find Marco, you need to find Martin. You'll know who they are. They'll introduce themselves to you. Go to them right away. Let them know what the case is. They'll radio it up to me. We'll have discussion about it and then determine if that's a legitimate claim or not. Because we get it. Sometimes things happen. And requests can't happen at a later time. It's got to happen right away. Unfortunately, we have a schedule to keep to. If you decide later that you want to rerun, it's just not going to be possible. So if you're a skater, talk to your coach about this. If you're a coach, just be in a spot where your skater knows where you're at to help them make the decision on whether they need to ask for a rerun or a restart.
One thing that is important, Garrett, because we tested it with Park and worked really finely. So we have implemented redundancy in the clock that is operating the judging booth. So together with the clock that you see in the field of play represented in digits, we are also manually timing your run. This means that if for whatever reason the clock doesn't start, there is a clock running that is just made available to the head judge as well. So it's up to you at that point to decide if stop or keep going, do your run, and we will have a backup for you. So
yeah, well,
that's important.
That is a good point. We will always know how much time you have left, whether or not there's a technical issue with the external time clock. Thanks, Luca. Equipment failure. The clock's not going to stop. If you break your board in the middle of a run, the show goes on. You have until 45 seconds to either grab another setup that you have, or if your friend is feeling generous, you could use their board. But keep in mind, I've seen this happen before where someone breaks their board and then someone's being nice and they'll let them use their board and they'll break their board too. So just, that's up to you to decide how nice you want to be in that scenario. Trick refusal. Let's talk about trick refusal. So this is in the single trick section when we get into trick refusal. We have this X over your arms trick refusal concept because you cannot improve a score for a trick that you've already landed sketchy. So if you do a kickflip front board on the rail and you squirrel out and land it really bad, we're going to have to judge you on that. And it's going to be substantially less than what you could have gotten if you would have landed it clean. So if you need kickflip foot front board score and you land that trick sketchy, you have 5 seconds to throw an X above your head, cross your arms, and you will not be scored for that trick, giving you the opportunity to do it again, land it clean, and get the full point total for that kickflip front board. So that's what that trick refusal means. And we can now talk about waxing. Simply put, you can't wax the obstacles after the competition starts. Okay. We created this rule specifically because let's just say you're about to 50-50 a hubba in your run, and then someone blasts that hubba with wax right before you go, and you had no idea that it was waxed. You all yawn, you shoot out, and that sucks for you. So that's why we have that wax rule. It's for your own benefit. You can wax your board as much as you want, you just can't wax the obstacles. That being said, there is an exemption to this guideline that is weather dependent. If the weather's bad, if the weather's hot and there's wax dripping off the obstacles and all the riders and all the skaters in that heat agree to get rid of that waxing guideline, then it'll be lifted. That's the new amendment to that waxing guideline. It's that simple. Lastly, we have clarification requests. Keep in mind that once the competition scores are approved by me and they are published, they are final. There's no going back and editing scores. That being said, we're happy to give you the context if you are unsure about something, if you're unsure about a score. The World Skate staff and the judges are here as a resource to help you succeed. It's my goal as the head judge here to be a resource for you. I have no problem whatsoever clarifying scores and clarifying ranking. Like I said earlier, I promise you there is a rhyme and a reason to every score that goes out. So I have no problem filling that out. Just please do so within a reasonable time frame to give us enough time to respond to you. But yeah, listen, I want to thank you guys. I've had a lot of really productive calls with not only the International Judging Commission over the past couple months, but with the Athletes Commission, riders and coaches, and it's been a phenomenal experience to be able to get your feedback. And I love hearing from you. I love talking to you. The more that we do this, the more that we just are able to provide a better experience for you while you're here. I want to thank PitchMove, the company that I worked with for this presentation, who I always use and highly recommend. And want to thank the World Skate staff and the judges and the coaches and the athletes. Everybody here is really putting in 100% effort to make this experience great. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to see what all the riders do. So thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. We have a couple of questions that came in during the webinar. So the first comes from Thomas Winter, and he's asking, I would like to ask a specific example about scoring semifinals from World Skate, about scored semifinals in World Skate. So skater A did a run in the quarterfinal and repeated the same run in the semis, received plus 18 point. Execution was the same. Skater B, did a run in the quarterfinal, repeated the same run, same execution plus same style, and received plus 18 points. Skater C did a run in the quarterfinal, repeated the same run, same execution and style, and received plus 3 points. I would like to ask an explanation to the above mentioned, please.
That's a pretty specific and a pretty deep cut, but there's a lot of factors that come into play when we are increasing scale as we move through the competition. And I don't know obviously all the context for this specific hypothetical scenario, but what this scenario sounds like to me is that rider C, or was it C or rider F?
Yeah.
What it sounds like is that rider C wasn't fulfilling one of the judging criteria enough in order to have their scale increased. I'm assuming that may have been the scenario that's happening here, but yeah, that's without any more context, it's probably the best that I can answer that question.
And one thing that is important, and I think that comes from the explanation and presentation that you just did, and we're getting back to this point at the same time, especially when it comes to runs, there's no way that you can fix a score and attach a score to a run and pretend that to be the same throughout different rounds. That's a matter of, as has just been explained, that it's a matter of how the scale is used to rank. So scoring is always a tool to create a ranking. So what you should always look at is the comparison between runs or tricks within a single competition phase. If
Yeah.
you get out of that perimeter, it's simply how it doesn't work skateboard judging. You always should look into, is the rank of that run done correctly? That is how it works. Another question from Will Stoyles is, can you please let us know the percentage you dock scores for repetition rules?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are no set parameters for it's not we don't have enough hours in the day to rely off of percentages for how much we deduct. And we're too late into the season to post ranges. We're not there isn't a set score. We are consistent with the way that we critique repetition, which is why I included those two video examples. Those are the main two reasons and scenarios how repetition can affect your score. And as I said, in runs, there isn't a percentage, there isn't a set number because of the different the infinite amount of hypothetical scenarios that can happen within a run. There's no way to quantify that yet as far as deductions, unified agreed on deductions for repetition in runs. Just know that broad stroke, if you're repeating runs or if you're repeating a certain kind of trick, it is uh, it is going to populate and affect in your overall score.
And one thing that I believe is really important for you to understand is that judges in skateboarding are not here to create formulas to constrain skateboarding into precise recipes to obtain specific scores. The spirit of the repetition rule has been always the one of providing a general address to skateboarding and establish the concept that skating with a variety of tricks, it's preferable. And that's how you should take it. You shouldn't go too nuts around those percentage and everything. And for coaches, thing is, it's not the end of the world. The example that have been put up regarding the deduction is ain't no dramatic. We're just talking about what judges want to see and what you should lean toward and be free in doing the most variety of trick possible. And then it's not something that is going to penalize or put you out of of the competition.
Yeah, and it is totally valid, right? Where that sentiment is coming from, where that question is coming from, because I completely understand it would help provide a lot of context if there was more set numbers to things. But the best way that I could word that is that the spirit of the repetition rule, as Luca had said, it's rooted in fairness. We're always looking at the sum of all the parts of your run and placing you and ranking you and scoring you based out of fairness. So that's kind of how we use the repetition rule in order to fairly rank you.
Another question that is from an anonymous attendee is wind considered under weather circumstances? I think this is not that much of a judging question. It's more of a competition management related questions. Yes, of course, if winds get up to a stage that where we realize that it becomes a problem, is up to the TD to consult with the course manager and the skaters and make a decision wherever the competition can move ahead. Experience says that it's most of a problem for vert skating, definitely. It's a different thing for park and again different for street, but let's reassure that we're not going to get you skating in the middle of a windstorm. Then we have Leah Shirer that is asking, does the repetition rule also apply on tricks with similar movement? Example, Bennett grind and 180 nose grind or frontside nose slide.
No, that's a really good question. we really don't want to zoom in that much on the repetition rule as far as like the way that your body is moving. I would zoom out a little bit on that and say, is it another frontside nose slide variation? Is it another caballerial in variation? Is it another heel flip? We don't want to constrict that so much and zoom in so far to where we are really nitpicking your skating. It's more broad than that. So it's a really good question, but we aren't finding ways to deduct with the repetition rule. We're in fact doing the opposite. We're always trying to find ways for you to get the most amount possible out of fairness. But yeah, it's a great question.
Another question is, how do you agree together to drop the WOX guideline? So in the first place, that becomes a problem in under extreme heat weather, and it's been a problem in Rome, and it's been a problem, yeah, mainly situation like those with over 30 degrees of temperature. And normally it is a big problem for single tricks more than everything. And normally those competition phases have way less skaters. And so if we realize that that is becoming a problem, because we hear, we see, we realize that it's happening, someone brings it up to the course manager, we will ask during the check-in, as skaters are checking in, make note and see what's the majority's opinion. Another question is the hierarchy list in tricks. Is it available for skateboarders?
It's not available. That isn't a publicly posted document. That's kind of more of an internal document that the judges use in order to stay consistent with each other. That the reason why that's not a posted document is because things change. The tricks that are happening and the atmosphere that we have here is dynamic, and we make adjustments where we need to with that list. So it would be the concept of posting a hierarchy list would be kind of terrifying because there's so many different aspects and criteria that come into play when we are giving you a score. An example of that would be, let's just say we posted a hierarchy list of the tricks in the trick ledger, but we didn't like the way that you landed it, or there was repetition there, we have to adjust, or you landed it better than we thought. And when you did land it, we have to bump it up a little bit. There's so many things that change and in a dynamic atmosphere. So we are always trying to make adjustments to that. So that's kind of the first reason why that's not posted.
And it just to make sure, guys, the trick ledger is something that has been originated in 2021 before the Tokyo Olympic Games, is when we first
Yeah,
started to look back and in scores that judges gave and started to just list them up. And most of the coaches that are working within this environment, they have it, and it's nothing secret or nothing that is hidden. You just go through the competition and look the tricks that have been scored on the single obstacle, because that is also another reason why it's really hard to have that, to lock in into that kind of leisure, because there's a different degree of difficulty of the same trick conducted in on different obstacles. So that's the reason why we don't want to put skateboarding in a box. That is the main thing.
Yeah, I can piggyback on that and kind of just clear up that trick ledger is more of a roadmap for the judges in order to stay consistent and have at least some kind of a jumping point and consistency in what we're scoring you. And that kind of just speaks to how much more work we put in, because like legally we don't need to make a trick ledger. That's not something that's required. We do that in order for the skater's benefit, so that someone that gets a kickflip back tail score, if you get, let's just say you get an 80 for that, you're going to keep getting an 80. Why? Because we are always referring back to a data-driven score. We know what we've given for that trick, and we want to stick to it.
Then we have a question around about quarter pipes. Do we get scored for tricks on quarter pipes?
That's a great question. I love that question. You absolutely do get scored on quarter pipes. There are quarter pipes on the street course for a reason. They're just as much fair game as the rest of the obstacles on the course. That really ties into the judging criteria when it comes to the runs, the use of the course, the flow and consistency. If you use those quarter pipes, it's going to drastically increase your score. Why? Because it's adding to the overall impression. The judges normally like to see runs that we would call dynamic runs. And how that's different from a run that feels more linear is you would drop in, do a trick on a street obstacle, classic street obstacle, and then you get to the quarter pipe and you'd stop, turn around, and do more tricks. That feels a little bit flat to the judges. Using the quarter pipes and doing substantial tricks on those quarter pipes greatly feeds into the overall impression, and it just makes your run feel more full and more dynamic. So yes, great question. Use the quarter pipes.
And lastly, still from Thomas Winter, does landing of a trick affect the trick score substantially? Example, a skater lands a single trick, does not proceed straight on landing, slides sideways, but stays on his board. How does that execution affect his score?
Yeah, it's a good question. It will affect it. If you land straight and you land what we would consider a perfect landing, that's going to get you that maximum score. Sure, if you land and you're a little bit crooked and it kind of throws you off balance, it will affect that overall score, because that plays into the quality of the execution. We're always referring back to that best possible case scenario score, and doing the trick anything but perfect is going to have adjustments. That being said, out of fairness, we're not going to chop the head off of the score if you landed a little bit crooked, especially if you didn't put a hand down, or you didn't drag your toe, or you didn't power slide out of it, whatever. But yeah, it will affect it.
All right, Garrett. Doesn't seem we have any more cues. Thank you, and good luck to all the competitors, and we'll catch you around.